Welcome to Masterclass for Directing. I'm James Velasques. Today I'll be speaking to Carl Javér. We'll be asking about directing styles and what it means to be a director.
Hvis det øya da, og så det klipper her, det veldig bratt her.
Min rolle på Utøya var litt sånn, jeg var på en måte en slags sånn maskott på en måte.
Jeg prøvde å se på det her som en treningsøkt, bare psykisk da.
Kanskje faktisk jeg velger deg. Du representerer meg på øya nå. Og da ser jeg en politimann, og det stegene hans. Han går egentlig veldig sakte med et gevær.
Jeg startet her, i teltet.
Jeg meldte meg inn i AUF da jeg var 9. Av meg selv faktisk. Skulle bli statsminister, så rull. Så blir jeg fortalt at broren min skutt i hodet.
Jeg skal faen ikke dø i dag. Dette ikke slutten.
How does a director create a visual style that works both for the story and for the actor?
I think for me, since I work with documentary, for me it's really important to kind of develop the project and find the project's own DNA. And when you find that, you kind of build the whole project and a visual style around that. So it's, for me it's important not to kind of impose a style or impose a visual style or impose a certain way of working before you kind of know the project. And when you find your project, and it's of course dependent on the subject and how do you want to work with it, then you develop the visual style. For example, in Rekonstruktion Utøya, I made reconstructions with 4 survivors from the terror attack at Utøya. And from the beginning I had the intention of making it in a black box studio with the survivors, putting gaffer tape on the floor, creating the memories of how it was to be on the island during the terror attack. And of course that kind of set the core visual style of the project, and I wanted it to be kind of firm in a sense, and also then also contrasting the studio black box from the outside. So I think for me it's important that every project has its own unique DNA and that you follow that.
Yeah, that's great that you say that, because I mean your film is considered a documentary, but there is a very cinematic feel to it. You can watch it, and I wonder, you mix conventional filmmaking with there's a series of aerial shots, even high shots which you incorporate when they're sort of laying in the bed in that specific sequence. Did you have this idea in mind, or did that something, as you say, come from finding the DNA in the story?
It came from during the development of the project. So that's another thing that I think it's important to have time for you yourself as a director to understand your project, and also in a way, kind of esoteric way, let the project come towards you also, because it's easy to think that a director is kind of the mighty god and decides everything, but I think there is also, when you kind of start a project, it has its own energy, and if you are patient and allowing that the project shows itself to you, then you also can kind of find out what it is. So for me, every film is an exploration. So I would say that came out of the development and the discussions, and also I would say the ethical aspect of a film. In Reconstructing Utøya, I was dealing with a terror attack with many people dead and affected by this attack. So of course it has its own kind of very unique ethical problems, and you had to be careful about that. And I think that kind of cautiousness also affected how the film finally looked like. For example, I didn't use any archives. We were not filming on the island where it happened. And it kind of has this, as I said before, a strict, strict visual style which kind of worked ethically with the subject.
That leads me to my next question. Did you feel that you had an ethical and moral responsibility when taking on this subject matter, both to the audience and to the survivors, and also to the youngsters that were involved in reenacting?
Yeah, huge. I mean, especially in this project. I think every documentary has an ethical aspect that is important, and some to a larger degree. And this is, of course, was kind of to the extreme, I would say, because it was an event that affected the whole of Norway, and so we had to be extremely cautious and understand the implications, which also includes not only kind of the filmmaking, but it includes how you present the project, how you incorporate the families in screenings before, how you take care of the participants in the film after the shooting is finished. So you don't kind of just, because it's easy when you make a film, you make the film and then it's finished and you kind of leave everyone and you go into the editing room and then the film is finished. But here we had very cautiously had kind of dates where we were meeting up again, everybody, to debrief and talk without the camera, and the psychologist also had kind of a connection calls with everybody. So I think for this project it was very clear, but I think for every project, every documentary, and I think fiction also has things to learn about here, to kind of bring in an ethical aspect in the filmmaking, because I think if you tender or care for your fictionist character as they were real, I think you can also draw more complexity and depth out of those characters.
Hvis du kunne ha valgt bare slette hele den dagen fra hukommelsen, hadde ikke det vært liksom...
Jo, det sier jo noe der, men jeg ville aldri hatt samvittighet til å gjøre det.
Nei.
For de som døde der.
Ja.
Så kanskje slette smerten, ja, men ikke alt fra liksom minnet. Det ville jeg ikke gjort. Jeg synes det er viktig å huske det for minne for alle andre.
Ja.
Ofte når man er i senga og det er helt mørkt, prøver å sove, kommer du på en tanke, så blir du bare der i flere timer. Det første er at det originale som skjedde da. Og så noen steder stopper du, der kunne det kanskje vært en mulighet å gjort sånn, annerledes. Stoppe han, og så begynner du å dikte opp egne versjoner av det, så det tar på en måte aldri slutt i hodet.
Can you describe a bit of the process in making this film? Did you have the idea from a psychological standpoint? Were you interested in that point? Or was it the most the subject matter and just kind of the process and coming from start to finish?
The film Rekonstruktion Utøya started through a conversation between me and Fredrik Lang, the producer. We tend to talk a lot, and I think talking is a really good way of developing projects. We talked about the event at Utøya, and we both had the feeling that we didn't really know when it happened. And we both got kind of curious, why has this event kind of slided out of time, which apparently happens with traumatic experiences. They tend to kind of lose its sense of time because it's a trauma. And then we were also, in this conversation, we were also kind of both annoyed that the perpetrator, the terrorist, had such a huge exposure and such a huge kind of he had the prior right to tell the story. And we both felt that wasn't correct. I really felt that the carrier of the story should be the survivors, not the perpetrator. So I wanted the film to be part of that, of moving the story from the perpetrator to the survivors. So how do you make a documentary about a terror attack? And this was just 4 years after the attack. How do you make that? Is it possible? And from an ethical standpoint, it's very difficult. But then I had another project I was developing where I had this kind of idea to work in a studio with white gaffer tape and reconstruct memories. So then I merged those together, and then kind of the whole idea just kind of came up. It went very fast. So from the kind of the first 2-pager, it stayed pretty intact all through the process. And what I did then, the first thing I did was to approach the Norwegian kind of the center of the survivors and had a presentation for them just some months after the idea was out. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to test the project. Is it, from an ethical standpoint, is it possible to do it? Can I speak about the project in front? Can I speak about the project in front of the parents who lost their kids, and also survivors who were shot at, and still feel I can do that? And what are their reaction to it? So we had a kind of really good conversations, and some of them said it's too early, and some of them said there should never be a film about this. But I really believe in the power of film as a way of speaking about the unspeakable. And I think it also has the cinema or the movie theater has possibility of being that room to both grieve but also understand really complex events. So we had a good conversation. It ended that we could publish a text on their closed Facebook account. So where we asked for survivors who wanted to speak about and do this kind of reconstruction with us, who felt they were ready to do it. Yeah. And then we had people coming towards us, which also was important. I didn't want to go out and hunt survivors. I wanted them to take the first step, and then we met them and made a selection out of that.
And the writing process there, I mean, writing a documentary manuscript is quite, I imagine, different than writing a fictional. What can you describe that process? It is.
I mean, writing for documentary is very different from fiction, but in a way, for me as a director, I've been writing more and more for every year, and for me, it's a very important aspect of the filmmaking. You should remember that it's never the film. What you write is not the film, but it's a help for getting to know what you want to do. But I think for me it's important, and it has been increasingly important over the years also. So I write a lot, and for Rekonstruktion Utøya I wrote like a full script. And then you can ask yourself, how can you write a full script of a documentary when you don't know what will happen? But what you do is you develop an experience of what can happen. And you write what you want to happen. And it helps you also to find that when you do the filming later. So you can still make the connections.
And do you use that script? Is that something that is distributed to the team and the?
No, the script is strictly for the kind of inner core. I never show it to the one I film, because of course I want them to experience everything fresh. So, for example, in Rekonstrukting Utøya, I had like one image was I saw kind of the survivors and the young Norwegians who participate in this reconstruction standing around a big fire in this kind of Norwegian landscape. There was something about this image I liked. And then of course when we had evenings, I made sure they got a lot of firewood and made this fire, So some of the images you kind of pick, and then of course most of the images and reactions you don't pick, but you are kind of it's happening in the moment. But I think for me it's a support to kind of try to envision what will happen. Then it will never be like that, but when you have envisioned it, you can search for it also.
And you come from an editing background, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that help a director, and how did it help you through the years?
I'm very fond of the editing process, and I have worked as an editor, and I have also edited other projects, and I edit all my own projects, even if I try to get away from it actually, but I haven't succeeded fully yet. But for me, editing in the documentary, of course, editing is extremely, I mean, it's crucial. And you can say, like, if a fiction develop a script and then they make the shooting, in a documentary you do the shooting and the editing is the script. That's kind of where you put it together. And for me as a director, the editing process is important for me to kind of understand the film and develop the film. And it's something with that hands-on work that I really like.
And how does one plan a film like Reconstructing? What goes into the planning of it, both setting and shooting days wise? And are you given a core amount of days, or is it sort of free and you develop it? I think just in terms of budget and those things. Yeah,
I have been working a lot with observational documentaries, which is, of course, you have a very small team, often 2 persons. And you film for a long time, like 8 months or a year, and then you edit for a year. But in Rekonstruktion Utøya, it was kind of almost like a fiction setup. I developed it for 2.5 years. We had a 2-week shooting, and then a 1-year editing. So it's kind of so in a way, when we were on set, we had like a full fiction. We had the Aslak Lutens set the lighting, who does the lighting for Lars von Trier, and we had 2 camera persons in the studio and a 3rd one filming the documentary outside the studio. And we, it was a huge team, and we were like 15 people and 10 other in the crew. So in that sense, it didn't differ that much from a fiction production.
Can you describe a shooting day? Just if you give an example of what from, doesn't have to be from start to finish, but
yeah, I mean, there's one peculiar thing about northern Norway, that is that the sun never goes down, so you kind of get this, the day never ends, and you can be filming something outside and somebody says, it's 2 o'clock in the night, and say, oh shit. So it's kind of really good thing. But basically when we were filming there, we were on this camp together, and that meant you were kind of you had possibility to film almost all the time. But normally what we did was we had a 2-day reconstruction and 1 day off. 2-day reconstruction, 1 day off. And the 1 day off we filmed also and used in the film, because it was kind of when they went on, the kids went on a hike, or they went to the swimming in the bath house, or visiting reindeers, and we used that in the film also later. So it basically, it was kind of a classic everyday shooting work.
Det liksom det bildet her som så sterkt. Og så måten de ligger på, det helt prikk likt, liksom sånn. Det som om de har sett det bildet, og så ligner det. Det så som de tre holdt mye sånn sammen, da. De delte mye sånn kjærlighet. Kan egentlig åpne. Det skulle vært så enkelt bare. Der også. Det var en god følelse faktisk. Sånn. Ja.
Considering how long it takes to get a production made and get it off the ground, it can be sometimes years. Where do you find your commitment and creativity to keep pushing through to get it made? Where does that come from?
I think the kind of stamina or the fire to make a film, you need to connect with the film. And I felt, for example, in Rekonstruktion Utøya, I felt that the film in itself had an energy. And sometimes it kind of rushed ahead of me, and I felt I just had to kind of cling to it because it wanted to be made. It wanted to happen. And then I think as a documentary filmmaker, most documentary filmmakers like me are kind of marathon runners. You know, we know it's not a sprint; it's a marathon, and you just have to commit to it. So you have to be in project that you really like, that really kind of hooks into you, because you commit yourself for many years, and if it's not 100%, it's very painful. So it has to be something that you really burns for. Reconstructing Utøya took 4 years to make, and my previous project, Freak Out, took 4 years. So it's a long time you commit yourself to.
In terms of this ethical and moral responsibility, did you find times that in reconstructing that it affected your choices as a director, both maybe when you're shooting but also in editing?
Yeah, I would say the ethical aspects affects the way I work all the time, and sometimes it can be a conflict. During the filming of Rekonstruktion Utøya, I had sometimes I had the feeling that either I'm a really bad psychologist / friend and a good filmmaker, or I'm a good, or the opposite, it's either. But I also sincerely think that part of the filmmaking is also to kind of create an experience for the one you film. So I'm not allowing myself to kind of walk over anybody just for the sake of the film. I think there's other way. I think there's other way to make a great film anyway. And I had, of course, there were moments. I mean, it's the odd thing about documentary also. If something goes wrong, it's actually quite good, It's, in life, if something goes wrong, it's wrong, You don't like it, you get a parking ticket or, But in a film, if somebody gets a parking ticket, it's good, because it creates attention, and it creates a moment for us to see something clearer. So when people you film touches into inner resistance, and in this case, with the reconstructions, some of the kids, it was a very kind of hard thing to go back to kind of commit yourself to go back to the worst day of your life. And of course, some of them felt kind of really resistance, and filming that is, of course, you have to decide how far can you stretch it? How far can you fit? When do you say we don't go any further? But my kind of basic gut feeling is to incorporate that into the film. So instead of being something negative, it actually creates the film you're making. And in the editing process, I also had the feeling because of the sensitivity of the ethical aspect, I couldn't have a film where one of the survivors said, I hate the film, I don't want it to be screened. You know, I wouldn't want to get in that situation. I would really like to kind of meet them and make it a full experience that was positive for them. And I think, you know, I try to be hard but fair in the editing, and I try to balance things out, and I try to make it also kind of, in a way, poetic, that they can see their lives from a higher point of view. But there were moments where we had kind of clashes about the editing. But then what I learned was, often it was that there was something I hadn't understood yet. So for example, there was one of the survivors, I didn't fully understand the implications of him and his brother's story, and how his brother's story shadowed his story. And he reacted very strongly on that. And I felt, since he reacts so strongly, he has trust in me. You know, he wrote me a really long text message. There was like an email, but it wasn't text message. And I felt, you know, it was very kind of, it got me scared, because I felt like now maybe I'm losing him. But at the same time, I felt if he can be so frank and earnest with me, we probably have a kind of a strong bond. So we had a meeting, we looked through the material, we talked about it, and then I understood something I hadn't understood. So I made a re-edit of a part, and it became much better, much better. So I'm really happy that he reacted, and I think the film benefited from it. It got more complex, more interesting. So I think I would say every breakdown has the seed to become a breakthrough, if you stay with it. You know, if you dare to stay with it.
Great. Did you see a growth in them after the film was made? Did you see a difference in the way they sort of talked about it? Did it become easier for them, or was it more?
Yeah, all the 4 survivors had a good experience from the reconstruction. One of them said, I never in my life believed that I would have kind of a positive connotation around Utøya, but now I have. So it wasn't the purpose of the film. I mean, it wasn't a therapeutic project, it was a film project. Sure. But I think the outcome, in some sense, has become therapeutic.
Yeah, because I can see a sense of hope in their eyes.
Yeah,
which was quite moving in a way.
Yeah,
especially the first survivor and the last. I saw a sense of hope, and that's, yeah, I have some, you know, this was a huge traumatic experience that is never going to go away, but somewhere they found this hope in you could see it in their eyes.
Yeah,
it's quite nice smiles with the cries.
And I think, I mean, you know, even if it's a hard subject, for me it's very hopeful that young people dare to go in to that area, and instead of kind of just pushing it away and not pretending it happened or not talk about it, actually kind of going into it, exploring it, and coming out on the other side. So for me, that's kind of a really positive thing.
Yeah. What would you say the most difficult part of directing is? What is the most challenging part of being a director?
I think sometimes some of the most challenging part is, I would say, actually the ethical aspects and the access, keeping the access on a high level, because you want to develop access with the people you film, so you're allowed in to film what you want to film. And the deeper access, the more you can film. So getting the access and keeping the access all the way through. Then of course there's kind of, it's always kind of technical issues when you're filming documentary, like, you know, is the sound working? Can we film here? And then there's time issues, you know, the sun goes down and we have to be finished, we have to get this before, and so there's a lot of kind of practicalities. But I would say what kind of makes me, you asked about difficulties, what makes me most nervous is kind of the fear of losing the access by either by what I do or by some force that I don't know about. Because you can go into a project for 4 years and suddenly something can happen to one of the characters you've been filming for 4 years and they don't want to participate anymore. And maybe it's not because of you, maybe because they become religious or, you know, whatever can happen. So kind of the fear of losing the access is tough, I think, for any documentary director.
Can you give us some of your influences in filmmaking?
Influences in filmmaking, I mean, since I come from an observational background, I kind of admired old filmmakers like Fredrik Weisman and Erik M. Nilsson, a Swedish documentary filmmaker. But then I look a lot at fiction, and I like any fiction who has kind of the authenticity of a documentary. I'm kind of an authenticity freak. I like that. Andrea Arnold. Werner Herzog.
Oh, both really great filmmakers. How involved are you in the photography aspect of, or the how do you work with the DOP in a documentary sense? Sometimes you film yourself as well.
Yeah, I film myself as well, and it depends. You know, sometimes I film in the development of the project, and sometimes the development kind of runs into the production. Then I'm stuck with the camera, keeping on filming. In Rekonstruktion Utøya, I worked with Henrik Ibsen, which is a Danish photographer, and I worked with him in Freak Out also, my previous documentary, and which is kind of, I think for me it's a privilege to work with a photographer. It's really kind of easing the burden and having somebody to talk to, and also makes it, you know, look great and poetic and beautiful in ways I couldn't, you know, do. It's a luxury to work with a photographer, and I really like it. And you know, and like Henrik Ibsen is, I mean, he's such a, my God, what a photographer. And then I don't only mean kind of framing, but the sensibility and the ability outside the filmmaking also, because you need to be a social person. You need to kind of, you know, half of your camera work is happening when you don't have the camera filming. You know, because then you're kind of chatting and talking and, you know, making people relaxed, and then when you start a camera, you're kind of halfway there already. So and he's phenomenal in that.
Do you have a dream project, or a project that you've just been thinking about for many years that you are looking at?
Yeah, I have a couple. Yeah, you know, but I often have several documentaries, like kind of projects at the same time, and now I have like 4 I'm kind of juggling between. One is an American project that is kind of stopped now because of the corona, but I mean, I like the Freak Out was about the alternative movement, and I'm interested in the alternative movement and the hippie movement, kind of any way that we are kind of tried to expand the idea of what it is to be a human being and how we relate to each other. I'm interested in that area. But then I'm also developing my first fiction based on a, you know, true story, and I spend a lot of time with the people in that story to kind of make it believable. Or so I can't say I have one, you know, the perfect idea, but hopefully, you know, every idea you make, you kind of develop into their own perfection.
Are you seeing a difference between the fiction world and the documentary world while developing the fiction project?
I don't know. Yeah,
you approach it the same way.
Yeah, it's kind of, for me as a documentary filmmaker, when I'm developing a fiction script, it's kind of it's kind of this scary feeling that anything is possible, and when anything is possible, it's also easy to kind of lose the anchoring to the reality, or to the reality has a gravity about it, and when you write, you can lose that gravity. And I prefer not to, because I think if the film, the fiction has the same gravity as we have, it's easier to connect to it and believe in it. So that's a challenge when anything is possible.
One last question. Do you have one piece of advice to aspiring directors? Something that they could take with them?
Oh, I have many advices.
But take two then.
yeah, but I would say, like, let's see. I would say to a director, when you develop a project, also listen to the project. Kind of acknowledge that the project has its own force. And that force can guide you. So you create, but don't forget to be receptive also to the project. Because when you develop characters in fiction, suddenly characters start to speak to you, and so you move your project into that moment when you also can be receptive to it. And the other one, I think, is time. To kind of allow yourself time, so you can develop a deeper complexity, because it takes time, and so don't, in a way, don't rush it. When I say don't rush it, that means keep on working on it. You keep on working on it. You keep on, like when you're dyeing a cloth. You sink it into a color bath, and you do it several times. That's what you do with yourself as a director when you go. But you sink yourself into the project until you are totally, in the same color as the project has. So time, yes, and receptivity.